Chapter 18 Darkstalkers. Many hours passed. Requiem scratched his head, wiping sweat from his brow as he slammed his book shut and added it to the completed pile, which now numbered 2. Phew! Another historic text completed, he declared triumphantly. These things are hard going, aren't they? How are you guys doing? Scanning the room, Requiem saw piles upon piles of finished books next to each of his friends. The familiar call and acrobatic flight of Dougal alerted him to Freya picking up another mammoth set of volumes. As she struggled over towards Geo and Urasil, she looked back at Requiem. Don't tell me that's as far as you've got. Distracted from their reading, Geo and Urasil also looked up at Requiem. What? He said defensively. So, I'm in the slow readers class. There's nothing wrong with that? The hearty chuckle of the Inquisitor filled the room. He seemed to enjoy watching people navigate the immense vaults. Nothing at all, he bellowed. Have you found anything? Requiem looked sullen. No, he said with a heavy heart. Tales and flights of fancy, nothing conclusive. Anyone else? Geo perked up. I've been reading more recent works. There's the Fifth Gate Rock Band. They look particularly scary. Then there's Fifth Gate Pizzas. I'll be looking them up in New York when I go. Oh, and there's some great works of fiction with any number of gates you care to mention. Requiem took the opportunity to get a word in edgeways. So, no, is what you're trying to say. Looking downtrodden, Geo replied, Yes, sorry. Requiem turned to the others. Urasil? Freya? Please tell me you found something, other than rock groups and pizza parlours. Freya also looked downcast as she flicked through another ancient-looking book. No, nothing that even hints at our people, let alone the intricacies of how the 4 gates came into being. Looking up at Requiem, she added, You know, it could be possible that Talis was playing with you after all, and this whole Fifth Gate conspiracy isn't real. Striding around the room, hands in pockets, Requiem muttered to himself. Then why would Libertina come all this way, and come with backup, unless she was after something else from the Inquisitor? But what? Got any ideas, Inquisitor? The Inquisitor sat tall and proud in his chair. As you know, it is the goal of many to have access to my vaults. If knowledge truly is power, then this represents the greatest power of all. Requiem slowly angled his head away from the ceiling to look at the Inquisitor with suspicion. Then that makes you very powerful indeed, does it not? And you know what they say about power, particularly absolute power. Looking most aggrieved, Urasil interrupted. So what are you saying? That the Inquisitor is working against us? I've never heard such nonsense. Nor have I, came a growling voice that tore into Requiem. Nor I, came a sharp snap. Requiem turned around to find Havoc and Pathfinder walking towards him, looking angry. We're all immortals of the Avatar Guild, you know, growled Havoc, proud and strong. Yeah, we're on your side, added Pathfinder, aggrieved, his plumage ruffled. Havoc! Pathfinder! It's so good to see you, called Freya, running with open arms and a beaming smile towards them. The Inquisitor leant over to Requiem as he watched Freya embrace Havoc and Pathfinder, burying her head between them. Requiem, the Inquisitor whispered, causing Requiem to pull his gaze away from Freya. One of the greatest pieces of wisdom I can impart to you is that power does not have to corrupt. I pray that you remember that fact. Requiem sighed and looked down at the floor. I'm sorry. My head is just full of conspiracy theories at the moment. I need to take my mind off things for a while. Rising in his chair, the Inquisitor spoke with great authority. Then go. Your monolith knows how to get here now. You can easily come back. We will take good care of your friends whilst you're away. Requiem found that his thoughts had become slippery. Each time he was on a train of thought, it ended up in a tunnel of pitch black, destined never to emerge with the answer. His lack of understanding and queues of unanswered questions were causing him to withdraw from the world in which he stood, making him harder to reach as time trickled by. Perhaps the sheer power of the Inquisitor's voice allowed him to penetrate Requiem's mind and be heard. Whatever the reason, Requiem stopped scuffing the ground and looked up at the Inquisitor. "Thanks. I'll take your advice, all of it," he said thoughtfully. Then came the ominous hum which signalled the arrival of Requiem's monolith. As Requiem entered it, Gio called out, "I hear it's a good day for Wimbledon." With a half smile, Requiem gave a shallow nod. "Thanks, Gio. I knew you'd understand." Behind a large green barrier underneath the royal box in centre court, the monolith burst onto the scene with the brilliance of the sun and a reverberating hum so loud that it shook the seats in the grand arena. As though stealth would make any difference after such a disturbance, Requiem poked his head out of the monolith. Seeing that the coast was clear, he sidled out. Without bothering to wonder why he hadn't caused a commotion, Requiem meandered innocently towards the empty royal box, where he proceeded to make himself comfortable. "Sir," the formally dressed man spoke with great reserve as he offered Requiem a green tartan blanket. Smiling back up at the man, Requiem replied, "No thanks. Tartan just isn't my pattern. Clashes with my suit." "Very good, sir," replied the man as he turned to leave the box. Requiem realised why it had been so easy for him to get into the royal box. Gio was wrong. The weather was appalling. The skies above centre court were grey. Thanks to the famous roof getting stuck, a sharp pulsing wind beat the damp and bitter air into every corner of the stands. Requiem was most displeased by the whole affair. He wondered how the fine drizzle could be both barely visible, yet at the same time so intensely annoying. He thought that perhaps the flash and bang of the monolith was just taken to be lightning. Either way, play had stopped, and few were determined enough to put up with the phantom drizzle. "This won't do at all," Requiem said to himself, wishing he had taken the blanket. With a concealed hand, Requiem manipulated the sky, dispersing the cloud to leave a bright, sky-blue hole beaming with brilliant sunshine, haloed in fluffy white clouds above centre court. "Much better," he said, with great satisfaction. He leaned back in his chair with the strawberries and cream he had converted from the phantom drizzle that had hit him. One of Requiem's favourite sports was people-watching, and he looked on with great interest as people got out of their jackets, took off their thick jumpers, and replaced them with sunglasses and hats. The aura of one boy fizzed and popped with delight as he tucked into a large bowl of strawberries and cream. Further along, a well-dressed man had a dreary blue energy signal with barely a spark, although he looked as though he had enough money to make Solomon blush. On the opposite side of the court, a deep red aura emanated from a teenage couple kissing. Within no time at all, centre court was filled to capacity, and a raucous applause signalled that the game was about to begin. Rook took up position directly in front of Requiem, an old school player. Rook had been number one in the world for a long time, and was now making a comeback. His opponent, Knight, was the new phenomenon, and the one who had taken Rook's ranking from him on this very court just a year ago. Experience and finesse faced raw power and drive, a grudge match to settle old scores. Everyone knew this was going to be something special, but not even Requiem could have known just how memorable it was to become. The game started, and Requiem watched their auras burn. To Requiem, Rook was a semi-translucent red. A darker red wave with a twinkling gold edge pulsed up and down his body, as constant as the northern star. Rook's aura was neat and orderly, resembling Rook himself. Perfectly timed pulses of gold shot along his arms and legs as he returned serve and glided across the court. Such an energy signal was the embodiment of knowledge, confidence and control. Turning his attention to Knight, Requiem saw that he provided an entirely different feast for the eyes. Knight looked like a man on fire. His burning aura, so erratic, made it difficult to see even the outline of Knight himself. As he struck the ball, his ferocity manifested itself in flares erupting from his arms. Although it looked as though Knight was going to go supernova at any time, peering through the flames, Requiem could see that a cool blue streak kept him under control, and showed that, although he was possibly more arrogant than confident, he had great strength, underpinned by a growing skill. Looking on, Requiem wondered if both players were that different after all. Perhaps Rook had once had the fire and temperament of Knight, meaning that Knight could become as elegant and controlled over time, harnessing his fire to refine his skill. Satisfied that both players were deserving, and that he was in for a lengthy and entertaining match, Requiem took time to take in his surroundings once more. He watched as the sun warmed the court, a cool breeze keeping both players and spectators comfortable. Closing his eyes, Requiem listened to the comforting sound of the ball bouncing from end to end for a while, before tucking into another tasty bowl of strawberries and cream. With every bounce, a little more of the confusion in his muddled mind was carried away by the breeze. Eventually, a peaceful smile returned to Requiem's face. The players were indeed evenly matched, with all sets going to a tiebreaker. After nearly 4 hours, it was 2 sets all. The energy from the crowd was electric. No one could tell how it was going to end. Suddenly, Rook missed an easy shot and was a point down on his serve. Requiem thought it odd, as Rook had had his perfect gold pulse ready to hit the ball, but he put it down to the wind. This was followed by what appeared to be a blistering serve by Rook, but which lost all its potency on the bounce, allowing Knight to hit it home and bring him closer to breaking Rook's serve. Requiem stopped the breeze with a calming pass of his hand and watched intently. Rook launched the ball, once again with blistering pace, only for it to hit the net. Perhaps age was catching up with Rook and he was losing his edge. Then it caught Requiem's eye. When the ball was struck, it gave off its own energy signal. A flash of green started at the back of the ball, quite flat when initially hit. As it left the racket, the energy headed for the front of the ball and became more rounded. With each impact and launch, the energy went from side to side, flat to round. On Rook's final serve of the game, the energy started as it should, but shot to the back of the ball before it hit the ground, slowing it down. When Knight returned serve, the energy grew wildly in size, almost bursting out of the front of the ball as it hurtled past Rook to break his serve. Requiem stared at Knight. Perhaps he was an Akatsuki. If so, he was well disguised. Akatsuki were not permitted to play at international sporting events. To Requiem, however, all Akatsuki had a distinct energy signal, and Knight simply didn't have one. Requiem's attention turned to the crowd as he hunted for a unique signal. But with all the sun heating a large and euphoric cloud, auras merged into a jumbled blur with the warm seats, stands and television equipment. Requiem turned his attention back to Knight as he started his service game. Again, the ball swelled with energy, but, this time, as it looked about to hurtle to the line and beat Rook, Requiem decided to act. Instead of ricocheting off the line, Requiem made the ball pound into the ground so hard that by the time it lifted off again, it had hardly any energy at all. It drifted nicely towards Rook's waiting racket for him to score a point. "Now let's see if you're out there," Requiem said to himself. Requiem cut Knight's next serve short, making it bounce early for Rook. However, As Rook swung, he seemed only to graze the ball with the very edge of his racket, causing it to go out. Requiem could see that this was through no fault of Rook's own. The energy of the ball suddenly switched to the side, causing it to swerve just enough to be mishit. "Right," declared Requiem defiantly as he sat upright in his chair. "This means war." "Indeed so, old boy, indeed so," replied a well-dressed elderly gentleman sitting next to him, "although I fear old Rook just doesn't have the bite any more." "Oh, I've got enough bite for the both of us, don't you worry." Requiem knew that the gentleman didn't know what he was talking about, but his hidden assailant soon would. 15 all, and Knight served with all his might, fire streaming off him in all directions. Even this wasn't enough to explain how the ball now had so much energy, causing it to leave a streak of green as it tore through the air towards Rook. Requiem sapped the energy quickly with a flick of his wrist. The ball started to glide. Rook swung for it, but something caused him to mishit the ball. Inducing adverse spin, Requiem forced the ball to spin back into court and score a point. On the next serve, Rook tripped on his laces. Requiem retaliated by loosening the dirt on Knight's side, making him do the splits. So the game continued, with all kinds of tricks coming into play, with Requiem intent on backing up Rook and levelling the playing field.